you hear about lead magnets and you hear about like workshops and webinars, but I mean, as me working for like our CFO, I can't be like, hey, I'm going to go listen to this webinar at noon, or I'm going to go take, 17 courses about how to do this thing. Like I didn't have that kind of time when I was working full time. And so I was like, what is the best way that I could teach this, which also leans into you could do it in a really different way and you could do it without being on social, and private podcasting just fit.
All right, welcome back to another episode. Today we are talking to Holly Haynes. So excited to chat with you today, business strategist who is using private podcasts in a lot of different ways. And today we're going to be talking about her launch, which is actually happening right now as we're recording this. So excited. Holly, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself? Tell us a little bit about your business and how you're using private podcasts.
Yeah, well, I'm so excited to be here. I think private podcasting is just a tool that has changed our whole business trajectory, which I love. So, my name is Holly Haynes. I'm in Columbus, Ohio. I call myself a business strategist, and my whole purpose is to teach women entrepreneurs to build a very full time business on a part time schedule without relying on social media. So, that's where private podcasting comes in. I have a 22-year corporate strategy background. I built my business while I was working full time. I also have twins who are 10. So we got a lot going on. I don't have a lot of time to post on social. And so I really needed to figure out a way to connect with my audience. And it started with a regular podcast. So I have a podcast called Crush the Rush. We've been able to really grow and scale that to the top 1% in the last couple years, which has been really fun. But I
Congrats. That's
felt
cool.
like I wanted to go deeper on things. And so I love podcasting. I should say that's like a piece of the strategy. And so we had this whole idea of coming up with a program to teach people how to grow and scale without using social. But I was like, what's the best way to teach that, right? Like you hear about lead magnets and you hear about like workshops and webinars, but I mean, as me working for like our CFO, I can't be like, "Hey, I'm going to go listen to this webinar at noon," or "I'm going to go take, 17 courses about how to do this thing." Like I didn't have that kind of time when I was working full time. And so I was like, what is the best way that I could teach this, which also leans into you could do it in a really different way and you could do it without being on social. And private podcasting just fit. Like it just made sense because my audience was already there, but also, think about how you consume content. I'm assuming that if you're listening to this, you like podcasts. And so the trick with our private podcast is we used it as like an introduction or a stepping stone into our program. And so it wasn't just here's why you should not post on Instagram and build a business without social media. It was like, let me actually show you the framework. So it started as a 5-episode podcast called Ditch the Social Drama, which personally I love the name. And everyone was like, oh, this is so cool because it's not on social and you're talking about ditching the social drama. So I feel like that all flowed together. It was really simple, 5 episodes. Every episode had homework or has homework. You can still listen to it. And then it very intentionally introduced our program. And so when we first launched our program is called Antisocial School. In about episode 3 out of 5 episodes, I start talking about Antisocial School. And I just like, not forcing you to buy. We're just like bringing it to your attention that, hey, there's a different way to do this. And so we've had our private podcast now for almost 3 years. We've used it as like our launch magnet, our like event every single time that we've launched Antisocial School. And I can talk through sort of what that looks like and how we did it. But it's just been really cool because I feel like I'll get on calls or I'll talk to people that are in our program and they're like, oh, I heard you say that or talk about your twins or whatever the thing was. And we're friends. Like I know them and they know me. And it's because they can hear my voice and they can hear the
Mhm.
inflection. And it's just been a really great way to build relationships. But I always say, relationships build trust, which is what the private podcast is doing. And then the trust is eventually leading to sales when they're ready.
We have a ton of questions. I
Yes,
know. I get
yes.
this. This is the best. I love
Yes.
this. But this is the coolest thing because you've got, how many times have you launched now with this? You said last several, is it
So
7?
we're on our 7th time.
Wow.
And I will say that the first couple of times, all we did was the private podcast. We didn't
Mhm.
do anything else. Now we're doing like private podcasts and like we have an open house where we'll like answer questions. But for the most part, the private podcast is driving our launch strategy, which feels so good and so different because you don't have to worry about like 100-step launch plan, right?
And anyone who's listening to this that has ever launched and felt like they needed a vacation or a
Right?
nap afterward, like this is, I love the fact that this is also something that fits into your just the way you want to, you get to choose how you want to launch and show up. Okay, so I think we've got, I don't know where you want to start, Lindsay, but there's a couple different ways we can approach this, talking about the podcast itself and some of the
Mm,
content and kind of how you leverage the content both for your current leads and maybe even to reactivate old leads that have had that podcast maybe for a while. I think we could start maybe there and then head
sure. Yeah.
into some of the other aspects of your launch.
Yeah, so I'll start with just how we created the private podcast. I think you guys make it so easy to create. I feel like it's 1,000 times easier than creating like some fancy deck or something because you're just talking but you're talking with intention. And so the first 5 episodes really describe the framework, but I'm giving you homework, I'm asking you questions, and then what we did behind the scenes is we created an email funnel that matches as you're going through it. So you're listening, but also I have your email, which I'm really excited about. I love email. And we're very intentionally like sending you the homework and checking in, be like, hey, in episode 3, we talked about repurposing content. Here's a great way to do that. Try it and send it back to me and let me see it. And so it's been this like really cool process. I was sharing before we hit record. I mean, we're almost 3 years in. Our open rates on this email sequence is like 70%. Like I'll send you the screenshot. It like blows my mind. And so that's kind of where we started. And then the second time we launched, I was like, huh, how do we do this? Because it's not a new podcast at this point, right? Like people have seen it. And so what we did is we added client case studies. And so the second time we launched, we added like 3 client case studies of like, hey, if you listened to the Digital Social Drama podcast, guess what? We have new episodes you can go in and listen to. This is what clients in the different industries actually did. And so that was a way that we kind of made like older content fresh again. And so really each time we launch, we'll add some sort of like bonus episode, which is really cool because it like pushes it back up on the platform. Then we can email people that have already downloaded it and been like, hey, we've got new episodes. I want to hear how your strategy is going. We're also educating about our program. And then this last time, because it's literally happening right now, we actually did a series, which is a really powerful podcasting strategy. We did a 3-part series of what's working with marketing right now when you're not on social. So it was
Mm,
things like, I always say like you can't just repurpose content. You really need to rethink. Don't repost it, repurpose it. So don't just repost on 17 platforms. Let's think about if you have this podcast, what does that look like? And so it's just been really cool to combine the I feel like we're doing like really awesome like thought leadership type content that's different and we're combining it with an email strategy where we're engaging and then eventually we're selling too, which has worked really well.
oh my
Okay, so
goodness.
we need to dive into this email
Yes.
campaign
Yeah.
because I don't think it's anything we've talked about. It's definitely a question we get from some of our users like, are people also emailing about episodes? And we try to make it easy and we'll email on your behalf that there's a new episode that's dropped. But there is nothing like a personal message
Mhm.
reminding someone what's in an episode, encouraging someone to listen, pulling out a good quote to head over to their podcast player to listen. I'm curious kind of I know you mentioned it's tied to the episode is out and then you send an email and it does and that mirrors pretty well. What I'm
Yeah.
curious of, so, to everyone listening, let's get those email campaigns to match because I'm
Right?
sitting here going like, Nora, we should totally have one for ours. We don't. Spoiler alert, 70% open rate is pretty rad. But then going into the evergreen strategy, and then this is getting maybe more ninja than some people want to get,
Yeah.
but like,
Definitely ninja.
are you emailing also regularly on that list, nurturing them, and then the new episode drops and you remind them? And then for the folks who just come in for the first time, do they get a different sequence that
Yeah.
makes it seem like that's always been there? I guess maybe that's
Yeah.
my
So if
question.
you're
That's what I
listening,
would
you're gonna
ask.
wanna take notes or send me a DM and I'll be like, "This is
Sure.
our strategy." But this is what we do. So if we're not in launch season, then everyone goes into so you give me your email and you're like, "Yes, I can't wait to listen to this podcast." And then we have it's a week-long nurture series, like, it's not short. And it's all about making sure that you listen to the episodes because we all know people listen to like the first 2 episodes and then they drop off. I don't want you to drop off. I want you to listen to the whole thing. And so it's everything from like, here's how to access the private podcast because it's a little bit
Mhm.
different. People get confused and things like
Mhm.
that. To the subject line is literally, hey, you're on my email list. But here's what's going to happen. I'm going to give you homework and I actually want you to see results from listening to this podcast. Like we like to do things different here. And so it's about a week long nurture sequence. And then we'll just drop little hints like, P.S., if you want to skip to the good part, check out Antisocial School. We're not really selling at the beginning. But then what we do in the evergreen model, so again, we're not launching, is you actually go into a sales sequence. And our sales sequence is selling our program, Antisocial School, but you're putting down a deposit. So because we only launch it twice a year, it's live. And the deposit gives you access to our membership for a quarter. So you get to like start right away. There's some bonuses in there. And so it's been a really cool way for me personally to network, come on podcasts like this and talk about our private podcast, but then actually be able to like get to know people and nurture people sort of along the way. So it's like a 2 week sequence where we're just like all we're talking about is ditching the social drama. After you graduate from that sequence, then you go into our like normal email list. And then when we launch Antisocial School again, which we're doing right now, then you get those sort of launch emails. But it's been fun because I feel like my focus gets to be creating really cool content inside the private podcast. And then the email funnel kind of like does the rest for us, which is cool.
Love that. And a question on the way you have it set up. Is it a drip? Is it do you have
Yeah.
it set up to drip for so they get one episode every day?
Yeah, so we use
Good
ConvertKit.
question.
And so actually Hello Audio and ConvertKit work really nicely together. We use Zapier and it's all connected. So like we get the email and then right away you get the first email. And then I think 24 hours later, it's like, hey, you're on our list. And then 2 days later, it might be, okay, you should be on episode 3. Here's the homework that we've given you so far. So it's literally like you're in a class and then we're strategically asking questions so that you respond because it's me answering the questions. It's not like a robot or anything like that, right? So it's really cool because people will be like, oh my gosh, I did this and I saw results like right away. This is so cool. And so it's just like a great tool to engage, but to get more people to actually listen to your episodes because that's like where the gold is, really.
Yeah, all in the consumption. So the feed itself, do you allow people to binge it or do you drip an episode once a day or is it all
You can
available
binge
once they
it. You
opt
can
in?
binge the
Okay,
whole thing. Yeah, our strategy is they're super short, so they're like 7 to 10 minutes. It's like
nice.
one topic, one focus, one action. So you can like skip around, binge the whole thing, whatever works for you.
And then the emails are just reminders. So if they
Yeah.
haven't yet gotten it, they haven't gotten episode 3, that's just a nice self-paced way to do it. Okay, so
Yeah.
now I'm curious, what kind of feedback have you received from folks that have gone through this that maybe not have been as familiar with a private podcast?
I think most people have heard of private podcasts, but they haven't seen them presented in this way.
Okay.
Mm.
So I think it's really cool when people are like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I got so much from this free resource. But again, I think it's the mix of like introducing a framework. So you have the framework, right? Giving homework and then layering in the email where they can ask questions. So it's like this sort of all encompassing strategy. And then, I think the client case studies are really fun because the feedback that I've gotten is like, I want to be on a case study. And so we have like graduates of our program that are like, oh, I can't wait to be like on the podcast. And so it's been this fun kind of like behind the scenes networking tool too.
I love it. I love it. And so in results, I assume, I mean, I don't know if you have numbers that you want to share or things, but result wise, obviously, if you're still doing it after 7 launches, I'm assuming it's
Yeah.
working fairly well.
Yeah. So, I mean, I'll share. So, my background is I always joke that when I started this business in 2020, I launched a course. Like everyone thinks they have to launch a course. And it was like, I had, 50 people on my email list, half were like my high school friends. And it was like 297 a course. And I was like, well, that's not going to work. Right. And so, what I did was flip the model and actually launched a high ticket mastermind, which sort of led to all of this. But to answer your question, Antisocial School has created this income stream that is now like a stepping stone into our mastermind. And so for a while, we were launching it like once a quarter, so 3 or 4 times a year. Now we're doing it twice, but it's created a six-figure income stream for our business without really crazy launches. And to
Mhm.
me, that's what I wanna do. I don't want to be I mean, we're launching right now, and, like, I just had lunch with my husband, and now I'm on a podcast interview. Now, it doesn't mean that I'm not, like, checking things behind the scenes, like, after this call, but it's just a different feeling than, like, stressing out about all these different things that you have to do. The other thing that I think, is really great is regardless if people purchase or not, the engagement that we have because of the audio portion of the private podcast and the email portion, like I shared that even in our sales sequence, our open rate is 60%. That's crazy to me. Like every time I look at it, I'm like, is this for real? Like I mean, that's really good for a sales sequence. So to me, that gives me data. Like the
Mhm.
emails behind the private podcast give me data of what are people interested in? What are they clicking on? If they're not buying, then at least like I've hopefully made an impact and, the next time around they're sort of warmed up to what we do.
And when you do drop those episodes, so they have the feed, you don't take away access, so
Right.
they can kind of retain access. And when you're dropping these new episodes, like a case study, or in this case, the series of what's working in 2024, they get you. I see you send them emails and say, "Hey,
Mhm.
we just dropped some new content for you." So you're reactivating or reengaging
Yep.
some of those old leads and maybe reminding them of why they downloaded it in the first place. So have you seen some conversions from folks that have opted in maybe months ago or maybe
Mhm.
even a couple years ago?
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's really cool to see when you send out a case study and then, that we actually had a client that was on the Food Network last year, which was really cool. And so we, of course, wrote a case study about it because that's a great one to share. And then when you share it, like people will respond and be like, oh my gosh, I forgot about this podcast. I'm going to re listen to it because I really need this right now. I don't want to be on social. I just need like a reactivation. And so we get a lot of people that will like go through it and then they'll come back and go through it again. And to me, again, that's like all data that you can use of like, okay, what's the most popular episode? How could I do something else with that? Maybe I'll create another podcast about a different topic. And so it's been really cool to see the engagement from being able to highlight some of the successes.
I think that's awesome. Oh my goodness. I love the fact that you're using emails with the private podcast. I love the fact that you're seeing engagement go up. And I just love the fact that it's relatively stress free for you, because I know we've all been part of six-figure launches
Yeah.
that we've really worked really hard for, to the point at the end of it, we're like, was that really worth it?
Yeah,
Mhm.
you're like exhausted. And honestly, when it comes to private podcasting, like it's so much easier for me to jump on here and tell a case study or a story or real life than it is to create like a 100-page Canva slide deck. I mean, I love
Mhm.
Canva and I will do it, but it's like, well, what if we could just get on and talk about it and you can hear
Yeah.
my emotion and you can hear my excitement around it and then you can listen to it on the way to taking your kids to dance class. And I feel like that's just a win for everyone.
It's funny. I like talking about this concept of the high pressure, like six-figure launches. For those of us who have felt it or been on a team, it's really cool. And there's a lot of risk involved with that. And I
Mhm.
think
Yes.
that's where the burnout comes from. It's like you basically feel like you have to get better and better every single time. But
Yeah.
you're also really scared that the other shoe is going to drop. And you're going to be one of those stories where you put all that energy and effort in. And that's the key, and it quote unquote flops. And so that pressure that we put on ourselves, and I think this is where like the solopreneur, you know, just the shame tied to that is really around I'm betting a lot on this, right?
Mhm.
Like this level of money must come in this month or XYZ happens. I lose that contractor or I'm back to just me. And so tie that all together, when you put that much effort in and you put that much pressure on yourself, it's really easy, I think, for us to like not want to show up and all the things. It's all related. What I want to point out though is it doesn't have to be like that. And I
Mhm.
think what we're seeing a lot more, there's a lot more conversation about this happening right now of like, if it is easier, and let's say it does flop because it's can happen, and it will
Yeah.
happen to people. At least you didn't, like you said, spend hours doing XYZ or doing the slides or doing all this other stuff. And instead, what you did is you started simple. with a private podcast. And then you launch after launch, add other things, right? You tinker
Yeah.
with the launch a little bit. And that is always what I recommend to people because we see those really high powered launches and we want to be like that. And that's an issue. So starting from the beginning and keeping it really simple and then adding all the moving parts and the things that, look fancy or whatever. But that's only after you've kind of got a proven offer, a
Yeah.
proven messaging. And what's cool is you didn't have to spend so much time and effort creating it. And I think the async aspect and the audio aspect is where private podcasting is like unmatched.
Yeah, I would agree with that, and I think, like, whenever you're launching something or, like, putting a new offer out into the world, you get, like, shiny object syndrome, and you're like, "Oh,
Mm,
well, Sally's doing this, and the other person's doing this, and I'm not doing that," and I always go back to the data, and I'm like, you just said it, to have video and audio, and then to have the email portion, like, combined together has been, like, the strongest results we've seen because we're, like, hitting all the different levels. But I also think just from, like, how I wanna run our business perspective, like, I'm a mom, I'm busy, like, I left my corporate job. I don't wanna spend 800 hours on my laptop. So I think there's a lot to be said for me to be able to get on a platform and you can, like, hear the excitement in my voice, or you can hear the stress in my voice, or maybe even hear, like, my kids in the background, and it feels more normal than just, like,
mm,
all the fancy bells and whistles kind of thing.
I love that. And the fact that you can use this strategy for live launching and evergreen. So this is a
Mhm.
year round model, which I think is also really important because I know we get questions all the time of, well, do you use it? How to use it for evergreen then? How to use it? I have live programs because they enjoy showing up live. Like I'm sure
Yeah.
you do. It's just, there's a certain energy when you have a program and you're delivering it live. But I love the fact that you're also using this strategy to send people to a wait list and then do the deposit. And it sounds like that is working in the months that you're not actually live launching.
Yeah, it's really cool too, and I will say the other thing, so, like, inside Antisocial School, we actually deliver the lessons through a private podcast. So we'll like, you join, and then, like, on Friday, this is like a drip series, we'll drip the first lesson, and then we hold, like, a Q&A where I'm, like, holding you accountable. Because, again, like, you're busy, like, you don't wanna listen to, like, a 45-minute training on, like, more stuff to do, so it's again, let's look at the data. If I can deliver something where you can listen to it, I mean, in this, because it's in like a workshop and a course, like we've got, PDFs and things that you can fill out, but then you can come to the session very prepared. You know what we're going to talk about, and we can use the time to actually ask questions and help you implement. So we took that like private podcast framework and then brought it into our program as well.
which makes sense from the buyer perspective because they experienced it and they clearly enjoyed it. They bought it and
Yeah.
maybe not expect the exact same experience. They expect an up level, right? The Q&A calls and stuff like that, but they
Yeah.
also obviously like audio.
Hmm. Yeah. It's been fun.
And students are responding, like success rates, I assume engagement rates, because we all know that we have a lot of people that buy courses and coaching programs and then they don't actually follow through or life gets in the way. And so a lot of courses make it not always as easy to get all the work done. But do you find that having a private podcast helps your students and your clients get more work done and have a higher level of engagement as they go through it?
Yeah, I mean, I'll say knock on wood, we haven't had one person not graduate, and we have graduation because it's called
Wow.
antisocial school. So to me, that's like a really great statistic. But what I've found is even if you can't make all the calls, I do see people consuming the podcast portion more than I see people consume like a video workshop because again, you can listen to it on a go. It's in your feed. For whatever reason, I think the podcast app is just easier to find on your phone. Like it's something that you're
100%.
used to. And so I know I can see people consuming it at a higher rate than I have like, some of our other programs where it's like a video that you have to watch. And so we actually have a goal as a business to take all of our videos and put them in a private podcast so that you can choose your method of listening because I feel like that's just how people are consuming right now.
That's a good lead into the question I often ask people who've created several private podcasts. Do you have one you're sitting on? So you definitely need to convert, it sounds like, more of your videos of your course. Is there another one you're like, I
Yeah.
have an idea for this?
I mean, if it were up to me, I would probably have like 10 private podcasts because it's
It
just
should
like
be up to you, by the way. No, I'm
it's
just
so much easier for me to come on here and talk. So yeah, I mean, we have another program. We talk about income stacking, and it's all about like how to, if you have one offer, make it into multiple offers. Like I would love to have a private podcast on that. A couple years ago, we did. It was called Crush the Rush Collaborations. It was a private podcast. It was like a limited time. Like it was only available for, I don't even know. It was during the summer. I think it was available for like 2 months, but I brought in guests and we talked about very specific topics. I feel like the possibilities are endless. I just think it's so cool.
I love that. So, quick question. Do you have conversion numbers for either the evergreen or when you're live launching of how many the people that are consuming the private podcast and how many folks are joining the program?
Yeah, that's a great question. I love getting into data. So we just launched our evergreen funnel like within the last month. So if I look at the first, let's just say 100 people that went through it and the timing of that, we had 4 people do a deposit. So what is that, 4%?
Mhm.
I think that's pretty good for
That's great.
evergreen cold audience, right? Like they don't
Mhm.
know me, they've never worked with me before. And then looking
And it's
at
a
sort of,
deposit. A deposit is different
yeah.
than a transaction, I would argue too, because there's like a forward thing versus I'm gonna get it right now and it's happening right now. So that urgency is different. And I think that's actually really powerful.
Yeah, the urgency is definitely different, which is something we've been like sort of monitoring and are like, okay, is this going to work
Sure.
long term or not? But it's been cool to be able to provide a resource at all times when it is like a live program that we're teaching. And then long term, so like I said, we've launched this 7 times. We've had over 100 people go through the program. I mentioned we have a really great graduation rate. I would say, typically when I teach a webinar, it's like, I don't know, 2 to 5% conversion rate, which is pretty normal. I would say the conversion rate for listening to the private podcast and then joining has been about 10%. So it's definitely more. The other cool thing that I also see happen is even if they don't join, they're not unsubscribing, right? And they're like engaged in our email list. So our average open rate for all of our email list is like 42% right now. I actually just looked at it because we're in the middle of a launch and I'm like, what's happening? And so I feel like that is also something really cool because they're listening to me,
Mhm.
they're hearing me on our podcast and the private podcast. And so they're interested in what I have to say. Maybe it's next time that they join or the following time or they'll join a different program. And so it's just been a really great relationship tool too.
Those are great numbers. I'm
Yeah.
curious because I know this question, we get this question sometimes. You've got this private podcast. It's an amazing lead magnet. It's doing a great job of pre-framing and educating and adding a lot of value and leading people to the program. How do you market the private podcast? Have you run ads? Do you do organic, social? What is your primary traffic
Yeah.
strategy? And obviously you have your podcast too. Do you mention it on the podcast?
Yeah, that is a great question. So, I mean, if I'm being super honest, I've had really bad luck with ads. They just haven't converted for us. I don't know. I think eventually I would love to learn how to run ads to a private podcast to see if those ads would convert differently than it would to like a webinar or something because they hear your voice. So that's like on our list, but we haven't done it. So for the most part, it's been organic. We'll do like a pre-roll on our podcast and talk about the private podcast. There's a lot of podcasting as like a lead magnet, right? So it's like, download our Ditch the Social Drama private podcast. So we always do that. And then we actually leaned into a partnership strategy this past launch, which has been really cool. And that is working with other business owners who have what I call lookalike audiences who would benefit being able to share with their audience, like how to scale without social. And then we'll give them an affiliate link to the private podcast. And then we give them emails to share with their audience. So that's worked really well. And then going back to the client case studies, I mean, this is like a very grassroots strategy, but when you like highlight other business owners, like people pay attention. And it's been really, really fun. And so adding those case studies and sharing them like feels good, but also, people then share more of it and they're like, oh, my friend was on this podcast. And it's just been like a cool sort of collaboration. And so I would say those are probably the best ways that have worked sort of right now.
I think that's great. I know we have some folks that run ads, some folks that don't, and I think everyone's experience with ads has been chaotic over the last 18 and,
It's been an
24 months.
interesting, yeah,
It's
yeah.
Yeah.
been an interesting ride. So I love the fact that you're in partnerships and that strategy has worked really well for a lot of folks. So I think that I love that the private, you can absolutely have an affiliate link to directly to the private
Mhm.
podcast.
Mhm.
And I'm curious for your affiliates that use it, probably something they haven't necessarily seen before. So I would expect them to be excited about sharing. For me personally, I would be a lot more excited about sharing a private podcast than
Yeah.
maybe a webinar. So,
Yeah, it's really different. It stands out. I think the name of our podcast stands out, so I would, like, think about how you name it.
Mhm.
And it's easy, right? So it's like we literally give you a Google Doc and it's like, here's 2 emails you can send to your list and here's the affiliate link to use. And then they're in our system and it kind of just like flows by itself.
Love it.
so cool. I love that.
Great.
This has been such a great case study in how to use private podcasts. I love that the combination of live launching and evergreen and then adding email. And I love that it's not complicated. You started simple,
Mm,
you added to it, you continued to refine. You didn't get stuck with any perfectionism or worrying that it needs to, be highly or overproduced or anything like that. It's just and it clearly works and it
Yeah.
converts and it's gotten results. I love that.
Yeah, I would definitely start simple. I mean, I don't think you need a ton of episodes, and I would start with like a really simple nurture sequence, and then you can add on. You can do like nurture sequence, then sales sequence, then you could make it evergreen. And so, if you try to do that all at once, it would probably make your head spin. But then you can always go back and refine it. I always say you could change the magazine cover, and you can like the content stays the same, but depending on what's going on, you can update what people see.
I can see how your strategy comes out. Sounds like Antisocial School is a great
Yeah.
place to learn how to
I
market
mean,
your
it's
business
very
without
aligned.
social.
I think that's why it
Mhm.
works. It's very
Mhm.
aligned and I'm very passionate about it. Like it's been really
Yeah.
cool to see it build and then we've had some clients behind the scenes that have done this as well and I've seen it work well for them too.
Are you an affiliate? We need to talk about this.
I am an
You better be.
affiliate.
Okay,
I feel
cool.
like I have done a bad job sharing it though, but I'm using Hello Audio for everything. So
I mean, I feel you. That is how I am with an affiliate of like, products that I love. I often am just like, I don't care. I just want people to know it exists. Like they don't have to click
yeah.
my link. Yeah, let us know if you want us to come up with an offer for your audience. We're totally down for
Yeah,
that,
I would love
especially
that.
since it aligns so
We
well.
have a resource page that we have
Mm,
all of our like affiliates on there. I know I have you guys on it. But when this comes out, like if we can share it obviously and then we could share like a code. I mean, I talk about it a lot. It's private
yeah,
podcasting and podcasting. So,
cool.
yeah, totally.
Holly, this has been super fun. Thank you for going behind the scenes in your business. I know you shared a lot of details, and we're grateful for that because people are constantly asking about launching with private podcasting. And you know what's funny is everyone does it just a little bit differently. So
Yes.
we hope that the listeners got a lot out of this. But Holly, before we let you go, we need to know if there was a private podcast with your life's ramblings, what would it be called?
Oh man. Honestly, I don't know if I ever shared this out loud, but I feel like when I left corporate, so I worked in corporate for 22 years in like really strategic, high level consulting, like intense projects. And I felt like leaving corporate and then coming into this like entrepreneur space, I had to like unravel myself. And so I'm always like,
Mm,
if I wrote a book, maybe it should be a new private podcast. It would be called Unraveled because I had to teach myself like, you don't have to get up at 5 AM. Like, I was honestly just like a robot out of pure survival because of like the way that the corporate world is structured. And then as a parent, trying to figure that out. And so I almost, I've had this business 4 years. 2 of the years I was working full time. We're on almost year 3 of not working full time and being full time in here. And I feel like I had to retrain my whole brain of like, it's okay to do things differently, and you probably hear that come out in my content of, like, just unravel yourself from what everyone else is doing, and, like, pay attention to what's working and, like, where your clients hang out and what feels good to you, and then in the end, it usually works out the way it's supposed to.
Love that.
that's a good name.
Yes, that resonates for sure. I also left corporate. And so, yes, definitely there was some unlearning and reconnection with
Yeah.
myself for sure.
Yeah, I joke that like my starting time in corporate was like 7 a.m. and now I'm like, I can't take meetings until 10. Like I have to do other things, which is crazy to me. Like it's so crazy, but
I
yeah.
love this for you. It definitely is fitting, I can tell.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you.
Oh, well,
Perfect.
yeah.
Awesome. Well, thanks for hanging out, Holly, and we will have you back. I have a feeling you're going to do something magnificent down the road. So, we'll have you back on and you can share more details behind the scenes
Yeah.
of your
Thank you so
podcast.
much for having me.
And there you have it, audio heads. Another episode of Launch Your Private Podcast is in the books. I hope you're leaving today feeling even more ready to amplify your voice and connect with your audience in meaningful ways. The adventure continues in our next episode with even more insights, strategies, and inspiration to help you along your own private podcasting journey. Of course, make sure to check out helloaudio.fm to start your own private podcast. And remember, you've got amazing content that needs to be heard. So let's turn the volume up. Until next time.